In the gleaming halls of the imperial palace, Princess Elena stood before the gathered nobles and diplomats from 100 worlds. Her silver dress caught the light of 3 suns streaming through the crystal dome above, but it was her sharp eyes that drew everyone's attention. She had rejected another suitor that morning, the 3rd this month. Emperor Reed watched his daughter from his floating throne, trying to hide his concern behind a diplomatic smile. The latest candidate, a supposed genius from the core worlds, had left in tears after failing to solve even the first of Elena's puzzles. "Your Highness," one of the older advisors spoke up, his holographic form flickering slightly. "Perhaps the challenges could be adjusted. 312 rejections seems rather excessive." Elena turned to face the advisor, her expression calm but firm. "The future co-ruler of the Galactic Concordat must be capable of handling complex problems. I will not lower my standards simply because no one has met them yet." The assembled crowd murmured. They had seen her tests. Mathematical riddles that made supercomputers overheat, diplomatic scenarios that had veteran ambassadors stuttering, and engineering challenges that left master builders baffled. Some said she made the tests impossible on purpose, not wanting to share her power. "The rules remained the same," Elena continued, her voice carrying through the vast chamber. "Any being of sufficient standing may attempt the trials. They must solve each challenge within the given time. 3 failures mean elimination." Emperor Reed shifted in his throne. "Daughter, the Concordat needs stability. Your mother and I won't be here forever. The people need to see their future secure." Elena's expression softened slightly at the mention of her parents, but her resolve didn't waver. "Which is precisely why we need someone extraordinary. The challenges test more than just knowledge. They test wisdom, creativity, and adaptability." The grand doors opened, and a servant floated in with a holographic display showing the latest applicants. Species from across the galaxy had sent their best and brightest. Scientists, scholars, and leaders from civilizations that had mastered space travel millennia ago. "Let them come," Elena said, reviewing the list. "Let them try their advanced minds against my tests. When I find someone worthy, you'll all understand why I waited." The palace buzzed with activity as preparations began for the next round of trials. Servants programmed the testing chambers, while security drones patrolled the corridors. In her private study, Elena adjusted the parameters of her challenges, ensuring they would reveal not just intelligence, but character. That evening, as the palace quieted, Emperor Reed visited his daughter's study. He found her working on a new puzzle, surrounded by floating screens filled with equations. "You know," he said gently, "your mother didn't make me solve any puzzles before agreeing to rule together." Elena smiled but didn't look up. "Different times, Father. The galaxy grows more complex every day. We need someone who can think beyond traditional solutions. And you believe these tests will find such a person. They'll find someone who sees problems differently," Elena replied. "Someone who doesn't just apply memorized formulas, but understands why they work. Someone who can surprise me." Reed watched his daughter work for a moment longer. Despite his concerns, he couldn't help but feel proud of her dedication. She truly wanted what was best for their people. "Very well," he said finally. "But remember, sometimes the greatest wisdom comes from unexpected places." Elena nodded absently, already absorbed in her work again. As her father left, she pulled up the list of tomorrow's candidates. More geniuses, more prodigies, more beings convinced they would be the one to finally impress her. Little did she know that far away, on a planet many considered primitive, a human was about to receive an invitation that would change everything. The palace grew quiet as night fell, but Elena worked on, refining her challenges, waiting for someone who could match her mind, and though she wouldn't admit it, her heart. The grand arrival hall of the Imperial Palace buzzed with whispers as the Earth delegation made their way through the shimmering force field entrance. Unlike the other diplomats with their elaborate hover platforms and gravity-defying attire, the humans walked on their own 2 feet, wearing simple but well-made suits. Among them was James, his dark blue diplomatic uniform standing out against the flashier attire of other species. He took in the massive crystal architecture with quiet appreciation, noting how the other delegates pointedly moved away from the human group. Primitives, one floating ambassador muttered, their translucent tentacles curling in disgust. They only achieved faster than light travel a decade ago. James kept his face neutral, having heard such comments before. He focused instead on observing the incredible technology around him. The floating platforms, the shape-shifting walls, and the artificial gravity that somehow felt more natural than Earth's. The delegation reached the central reception area, where a holographic official appeared before them. Earth representatives, you are here for the trade negotiations. Your quarters are in the outer ring section. Actually, James stepped forward. I would like to register for the princess's challenges. The hologram flickered in what seemed like surprise. The entire hall fell silent. Then, remarkably, someone laughed. The sound came from a tall, crystalline being who approached the group. You? A human. The crystalline being's facets sparkled with amusement. Do you know that our children play with mathematics your greatest scientists are still trying to understand? James smiled politely. Then I look forward to learning from them. I believe the rules state any being of sufficient standing may attempt the trials. The holographic official processed this request, its form shifting through various colors. Technically correct. As an accredited diplomatic representative, you qualify for entry. However, the success rate for even advanced species is 0. I understand, James replied. I'd still like to try. News of the human's application spread through the palace like wildfire. In her private chambers, Princess Elena reviewed his file with growing curiosity. Unlike other candidates with pages of achievements and accolades, his was surprisingly brief. Interesting, she murmured, noting his background in problem-solving and conflict resolution. Not the usual scientific genius or mathematical prodigy she typically saw. Your Highness, her advisor materialized in the room. Surely you're not considering letting him compete. It would be embarrassing for everyone involved. Elena replayed the security footage of James in the arrival hall. While others floated or glided, he walked with purpose. While they wore their technological achievements, he carried himself with quiet confidence. Let him try, she decided. At worst, it will show other species why we don't consider humans ready for full galactic integration. The next morning, James arrived at the testing chamber. Other candidates waited there, their advanced neural interfaces and quantum computers humming. He carried nothing but himself. A small drone approached him. Candidate James, would you like to requisition any computational assistance devices? Standard testing equipment is available. No, thank you, he replied. Just myself will do. More laughter from the other candidates. A bug-like being clicked its mandibles in derision. The human thinks he can compete using only his organic brain. The chamber doors opened, revealing Princess Elena herself. The candidates immediately bowed or performed their species equivalent gestures of respect. James offered a simple but dignified bow. Elena studied him with those sharp eyes that had seen through hundreds of candidates. You understand these challenges have defeated beings with mental capabilities far beyond human standards. I understand, Your Highness, James replied, meeting her gaze steadily. But sometimes a fresh perspective can be more valuable than advanced capabilities. For a moment, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in all her years of testing candidates, genuine curiosity about what would happen next. Very well, she said. Let the trials begin. The testing chamber hummed to life, and James stepped forward, ready to show that humanity's way of thinking might just be exactly what the princess had been looking for all along. The testing chamber transformed into a vast mathematical landscape, equations floating in three-dimensional space around the candidates. Princess Elena's voice echoed through the room, explaining the first challenge. Before you are quantum entanglement equations that have puzzled our greatest minds. Solve them, and explain your process. The other candidates immediately dove in, their neural interfaces connecting with the chamber systems, running countless calculations per second. James stood still for a moment, simply observing the glowing equations. A serpentine being nearby sneered, "Already giving up, human." James didn't respond. He walked around the floating formulas, viewing them from different angles. Then he did something unexpected. He sat down on the floor. Candidate James, a monitoring drone, hovered near him. "Do you require assistance?" "No," he replied, still studying the equations. "I'm just seeing something interesting." He pointed to a particular section. "Could you rotate that portion 45 degrees? The equations shifted. Other candidates paused their calculations to watch as James stood up and approached the newly arranged formulas. "The problem isn't in the math," he said finally. "It's in how we're looking at it. These aren't separate equations. They're reflections of each other." Princess Elena, watching from her observation chamber, leaned forward with interest. James continued, "If we treat them as mirrors instead of independent problems." He gestured, and the equations began to align. The solution isn't in solving each one, but in understanding they're all the same problem viewed from different angles. The chamber fell silent as his solution took shape. The quantum equations, when aligned properly, created a perfect symmetry that revealed their shared solution. "Impossible," muttered one of the crystalline beings. He didn't even use a computer. The next challenge appeared. A series of theoretical physics problems that had stumped research institutes for decades. Again, the other candidates attacked them with brute computational force. James approached these differently too. He asked questions no one had considered. Why do we assume these particles need to exist in our dimension? What if we're trying to solve a four-dimensional problem with three-dimensional thinking? Princess Elena found herself moving closer to her observation screen. His solutions weren't just correct. They were elegant. Where others saw complexity requiring massive calculations, he found simple patterns that made the answers almost obvious once revealed. The final challenge of the day involved solving a quantum encryption that normally took years to crack. The other candidates immediately began running decryption algorithms. James looked at the encryption and smiled. "May I ask who created this encryption, Your Highness?" Elena's voice filled the chamber. "It was designed by our most advanced AI systems." "Why?" "Because it's too perfect," James replied. "Natural systems have flaws, patterns that emerge from chaos. This encryption is so perfectly random that it creates its own pattern, the pattern of trying to avoid patterns." He proceeded to explain how this very perfection was its weakness, and within minutes he had broken through it. By the end of the first testing session, 3 things had become clear. First, several candidates had already failed and withdrawn. Second, the remaining ones were watching James with a mixture of confusion and concern. And third, Princess Elena had not taken her eyes off the monitoring screens showing the humans' progress. In her private chambers that evening, Elena reviewed the day's recordings. Her advisor materialized, looking concerned. "Your Highness, his methods are unorthodox. They don't follow any established principles." "Exactly," Elena replied, replaying James's solution to the quantum equations. "He's not trying to overpower the problems with advanced technology. He's understanding them, finding their essence." She paused the replay on an image of James sitting on the floor, studying the equations with simple curiosity. "Perhaps," she mused, "we've been so focused on finding someone who could match our advancement that we forgot to look for someone who could think beyond it." The next day's tests would be even harder, but for the first time in hundreds of trials, Elena found herself looking forward to seeing how a candidate would approach them. The testing chamber hummed to life on the second day, but this time it transformed into something entirely different, a holographic recreation of a space station in crisis. "Today's challenges are practical," Princess Elena announced. "This station is experiencing multiple system failures. You have 1 hour to prevent a catastrophic meltdown." The remaining candidates spread out across the simulated station. Warning lights flashed everywhere, and simulated crew members ran in panic. The advanced beings immediately accessed the station's computer systems, trying to diagnose the problems through data analysis. James took a different approach. He stopped a panicked crew member, actually a highly sophisticated hologram, and asked what was happening before the systems started failing. The other candidates ignored the crew, treating them as mere background elements. But James interviewed several of them quickly, building a picture of events leading up to the crisis. "The problem started in maintenance shaft 4, he said aloud, heading there while others were still buried in computer diagnostics, and they began right after routine cleaning of the quantum core's cooling system. Inside the shaft, he found something the others had missed: tiny crystals forming on the cooling pipes. The maintenance logs showed a new cleaning solution had been used. The chemical reaction is creating a blockage, he explained to the monitoring drones. We don't need complex repairs. We need to flush the system with regular water." His simple solution worked perfectly. While others were still trying to reprogram the entire cooling system, James had already prevented the meltdown. Princess Elena's voice carried a note of approval as she announced the next challenge: a diplomatic crisis between 3 warring species. The candidates found themselves in a simulated peace conference. The 3 alien species, all masterfully crafted holograms, were on the brink of war over a disputed planet. The other candidates began quoting galactic law and presenting complex economic models to resolve the dispute. James, however, walked over to the refreshment table and started arranging the food. "What is the human doing?" one of the remaining crystalline candidates demanded. James placed different foods from each species' culture together on plates. "Your Highness, I noticed something in the species' historical records. They all have a common food source, a grain that grows on each of their worlds. It's prepared differently, but it's essentially the same plant." He served the dishes to each delegation. "This grain crossed between your planets naturally, millions of years ago. The planet you're fighting over, it's where this grain originated. You're not fighting over separate worlds. You're fighting over a shared heritage." The holographic delegates fell silent, looking at their plates, then at each other. The threat of war dissolved as they began discussing ways to jointly study and preserve their shared botanical history. For the final challenge of the day, the chamber became a ship lost in an ion storm. While others tried to calculate complex escape vectors, James noticed something simple: the ship's shadow in the ionic clouds. "We don't need to escape the storm," he said. "We need to follow its pattern. Look at the shadow. It's showing us where the storm is weakest." By the end of the day, half the remaining candidates had failed. Those still competing watched James with growing unease. He solved problems not through superior technology or advanced calculations, but through observation and understanding. In her observation room, Princess Elena reviewed his performances with growing fascination. Her advisor appeared, looking troubled. "Your Highness, his solutions are primitive." "No," Elena corrected, rewatching him interact with the holographic crew members. "They're fundamental. He sees past the complexity we've built around simple problems." She paused the replay on an image of James arranging the food plates. "We've become so advanced that we've forgotten how to see the basic truths in front of us." As the candidates left the chamber, Elena noticed James pause to thank the cleaning staff. Real people, not holograms. In that simple gesture, she saw something her other suitors had never shown: genuine awareness of the world around him. Tomorrow's challenges would test more than just problem-solving. They would test character, and Elena found herself eager to see how the human would approach them. The grand testing chamber filled with all the remaining dignitaries and observers for the final challenge. Only 3 candidates remained: James and 2 others, a quantum-enhanced being from the core worlds, and a bioengineered genius from the outer rim. Princess Elena stood before them, her presence commanding attention. "Your final challenge is different. You must solve an impossible diplomatic crisis." The chamber transformed into a vast galactic map. In its center, a massive fleet of warships surrounded a peaceful planet. "This is New Eden," Elena explained. A coalition of advanced species demands this world be evacuated. They claim their predictive algorithms show the planet's sun will go supernova, threatening nearby systems. The inhabitants refuse to leave their ancestral home. You have 1 hour to prevent war. The quantum-enhanced being immediately began calculating probabilities. The bioengineered genius started analyzing the predicted supernova data. James, however, did something unexpected. "Your Highness," he said, "may I ask a question about the premise?" Elena nodded, her eyes showing interest. "Who programmed these predictive algorithms?" "The Coalition's best AI systems," she replied. James walked through the holographic ships, studying them. "And who verified their findings?" "Other AI systems of equal advancement." "Has anyone non-artificial checked the data?" The chamber grew quiet. The other candidates paused their calculations. "The systems are far beyond organic comprehension," one of the coalition representatives said dismissively. James smiled. "That's the problem, isn't it? We're not meant to comprehend the math. We're meant to trust it blindly." He turned to face the assembly. "History shows us that the most dangerous moments aren't when we lack information, but when we stop questioning the information we have." Walking to the planetary display, he pointed at key details. "Look at the evacuation demands. They're not just about safety. There are clauses about resource rights, mining permissions, territorial claims. This isn't about saving lives. It's about taking control of a world." The other candidates stopped their work, realizing the implications. "The coalition," James continued, "created a crisis using equations no one could verify, to force a solution no one could reject. But the real question isn't whether the sun will go supernova. The real question is, why are we allowing AI predictions to override basic rights?" Princess Elena's expression changed subtly, a mix of surprise and something deeper. "Your solution?" she asked. "Form an independent council, organic beings from neutral worlds. Have them work with the inhabitants to verify the danger. If it's real, help them preserve their culture and relocate together. If it's not, investigate why the AI systems made these predictions." He paused, then added, "The greatest diplomatic solution isn't finding the perfect answer. It's making sure we're asking the right questions." The chamber erupted in murmurs. The other candidates looked at their complex calculations, suddenly seeing how they'd fallen into the trap of trying to solve the wrong problem. Elena raised her hand for silence. "Candidate James, you haven't solved the crisis. You've challenged its very existence." "Yes, Your Highness, because sometimes the bravest thing isn't fighting the monster. It's pointing out that the monster might be an illusion." The other candidates, recognizing defeat, bowed and withdrew. They'd tried to solve an impossible problem, while James had shown why it was impossible in the first place. In her private chambers later, Elena reviewed his solution again. Her advisor appeared, looking confused. "Your Highness, he didn't actually solve anything." "No," Elena replied, a slight smile on her face. "He did something far more important. He showed us our own blind spots, our willingness to accept complexity without questioning simplicity." She watched the replay of James walking through the holographic ships, seeing what others had missed. "We've been testing for someone who could match our advancement," she mused. "We should have been looking for someone who could see past it." The final decision was approaching, but for the first time in all her trials, Elena felt something she hadn't expected. Anticipation about what might come next. The imperial palace buzzed with excitement on the day of Princess Elena's announcement. Nobles and diplomats filled the grand hall, their conversations a mix of speculation and disbelief. No one had expected a human to make it this far. Elena stood in her private chamber, watching the crowd gather through one-way crystal walls. For the first time in her life, she felt uncertain about her own carefully constructed plans. "Your Highness," her father, Emperor Reed, entered the room. "The court awaits your decision." Elena turned to face him. "Father, I've had a realization. These past days have shown me something I never expected. About the human. About myself. She walked to her desk where holographic displays showed recordings of all James's solutions. I designed these tests to find someone who could match my intelligence, my way of thinking. Instead, I found someone who made me question how I think. The emperor watched his daughter carefully. He had never seen her like this, her usual confidence replaced by thoughtful uncertainty. Every other candidate tried to impress me with their knowledge, she continued. James showed me the limits of knowledge itself. Where others saw complex problems requiring complex solutions, he found simple truths we'd overlooked. She waved her hand, and the recordings played simultaneously. James sitting on the floor studying equations. James talking to holographic crew members. James questioning the premise of the final challenge. I created puzzles within puzzles, Elena said softly. He showed me that sometimes the puzzle itself is the problem. The emperor smiled. And this disturbs you. It fascinates me, Elena corrected. For the first time, I'm learning instead of testing. Every solution he offered taught me something new about how we've overcomplicated our world. A gentle chime indicated it was time for the announcement. Elena straightened her dress, but her father touched her arm. Daughter, I see something in your eyes I've never seen before. Doubt. Not in him, but in your own certainty. Yes, she admitted. I've always been so sure of everything. My intelligence, my methods, my standards. Now I realize that certainty itself can be a kind of blindness. They walked together toward the grand hall. Through the crystal doors, they could see James standing among the assembled dignitaries. Unlike others who wore their finest attire and technological enhancements, he remained simply dressed, quietly observing. The court expects me to choose him or reject him, Elena said. But I've realized something else. These tests weren't just about finding a suitable partner. They were about proving my own superiority. Every rejection validated my belief that no one could match my intellect. And now I understand that true intelligence isn't about having all the answers. It's about being willing to question everything, even yourself. The doors began to open. Before stepping through, Elena turned to her father. I designed these trials to test others, but James ended up testing me. He showed me that wisdom doesn't come from solving complex problems. It comes from understanding why we make things complex in the first place. Emperor Reed watched his daughter with pride. Then perhaps you found exactly what you needed, even if it wasn't what you were looking for. Elena stepped into the grand hall, her mind made up. The assembled crowd fell silent, waiting for her decision. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't thinking about making the right choice. She was thinking about all the assumptions that had led her to this moment. As she approached her throne, she caught James's eye. He gave her a small, understanding smile, as if he knew that these trials had changed more than just his life. Elena took her place before the court, ready to make an announcement that would surprise everyone, most of all herself. She had sought to test the galaxy's finest minds, only to discover that the greatest test had been of her own perceptions. The time had come to share what she had learned. The grand hall fell silent as Princess Elena stood before the assembled crowd. All eyes moved between her and James, anticipating the moment that would change the future of the galactic concordat. Throughout these trials, Elena began, we have witnessed something unprecedented, not just in the solutions offered, but in the way they made us question our own assumptions. She descended the steps from her throne. Walking toward James, the crowd parted, creating a path between them. I designed these challenges to find someone who could match the intellectual standards of our advanced civilization, she continued. Instead, I found someone who showed us that advancement itself can become a barrier to understanding. James stood quietly, his calm demeanor a contrast to the tense atmosphere around him. However, Elena said, reaching him, before I make my final decision, I have one question. She looked directly into his eyes. Why did you really enter these trials? The crowd leaned forward, eager to hear his response. James smiled slightly. I never intended to win your hand, Your Highness, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Explain, Elena commanded, though her eyes showed she had expected this answer. I entered because humanity is often dismissed as primitive by the galactic community. I wanted to show that different doesn't mean inferior. That sometimes the simplest perspective can illuminate what complexity obscures. Elena's expression softened. You used my own trials to teach us a lesson. Yes, James admitted, though I didn't expect to learn so much myself. The crowd erupted in confused discussions. Elena raised her hand for silence. In seeking to prove humanity's worth, she said, you've done something no other candidate managed. You've made me want to learn more. She turned to face the assembly. I've spent years testing others, believing I had nothing left to learn. I was wrong. She moved closer to James. You never tried to impress me with knowledge. You showed me new ways of thinking. You never attempted to prove your superiority. You demonstrated the value of different perspectives. Your Highness, James said softly, I should withdraw from the selection. I entered under false pretenses. No, Elena replied, a smile playing at her lips. You entered with honest intentions. Everyone else came to win my hand. You came to share knowledge. She stepped even closer. And that makes me want to learn more about you, about humanity, about everything I thought I already understood. The court watched in amazement as their princess, known for her impossible standards and unwavering certainty, showed genuine vulnerability. So, Elena announced, I'm reversing the traditional role. James didn't seek to win me, but I choose to pursue him, not as a prize to be won through cleverness, but as someone who has shown me that true wisdom often lies in admitting how much we have yet to learn. James looked surprised for the first time since the trials began. Your Highness, I'm honored, but you'll need time to consider. Elena finished for him. Good, that shows wisdom too. She turned to address the court. The trials are over, but my education is just beginning. And I choose to learn alongside someone who questions rather than assumes, who seeks understanding rather than victory. Emperor Reed stepped forward, smiling broadly. The princess has made her choice, though not in the way any of us expected. The hall buzzed with excited conversation as Elena and James faced each other, both now embarking on an unexpected journey. She had sought a match for her brilliant mind, but found someone who challenged her entire way of thinking. He had come to prove humanity's worth, but found someone eager to learn what humanity could teach. As the court celebrated around them, Elena leaned close to James and whispered, I look forward to you showing me how much I still have to learn. James smiled back. As long as you remember to question everything I show you. Always, she replied, realizing that sometimes the greatest discoveries come not from finding the right answers, but from asking the right questions.